How do you kind of determine or pinpoint whether or not what you're potentially going to build is going to be scalable enterprise wide?
There are non-negotiables, and some are industry specific and some are just Gen AI specific. And I think without getting into every one of those non-negotiables, just use an example. In banking, you have very real regulatory hurdles that you have to be aware of. And so some organizations in those areas are considering we're not even going to touch anything that requires us to get regulatory approval. It's going to be internally faced. It's going to be internally faced without customer data. And so they know that once they get to that point, they're not worried about being non-compliant or breaking some regulation or violating some regulation. The other way to think about this, so that's a little bit more of the regulatory standpoint. This ties into the first risk that we were talking about is doing a thorough assessment of these use cases. Like you alluded to, there's always this element of failing fast, and that's more of an element than ever in terms of technology solutions. But there's also this element of you have to get your people up to speed. Their attitude towards work at the front line, at the leadership and the technology team level has to be one of adoption of generative AI solutions. If the team doesn't adopt it, that's a barrier to scaling, or at least a barrier to realizing value from scaling. There's always the idea of what the data and technical processes that are in place. The most remarkable point here is there's a common misconception that we see is that generative AI solves the data issue, that you can just throw everything you have in there and it's going to be able to spit out a result, but it doesn't. In many cases, makes the data strategy and the data architecture more important on the front end than ever. There's a way of thinking that a criteria to whether or not a solution will even go to a proof of concept is how confident are we in the cleanliness, the security, the accuracy of the data that we know is going to feed that solution. Because if we don't have that answer and we don't feel confident in it, then we're going to know that we're going to have problems, if not at the proof of concept phase, for sure when we start to scale.